Hi, I'm Emma Clarke, and this is Before the Bar Opens, the podcast about what happens before the music starts. I talk to people who make, use, and love music. Tim A. Duncan is a composer, conductor, and sound engineer. He's best known for his work around the world on award-winning major ice dance shows: Cinderella, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, Peter Pan, The Phantom of the Opera, Barnum, and Nutcracker. As a child in Manchester, he played the horn in the Middleton Band and Besses of the Barn. He went on to study theory and composition at the Royal College of Music and has worked as a sound engineer at studios including Abbey Road, Strawberry Studios, and Moss Film Studio in Moscow. He works across many genres, including pop, rock, classical, and musical theatre. I wanted to learn about his journey from horn player to world-leading creator of ice dance spectaculars. Tim, how did music start for you?
Basically at school, I suppose. At secondary school, and it was actually the history teacher, discovered a load of brass instruments in a cupboard locked away, and they've not been out, I don't think, for years and years. So he asked several people who he thought had got a bit of musical acronym. I've done a bit of singing at school and just dabbling around with the piano. So he thought I'd be one of the few that might be interested in taking up a brass instrument. So we all rummaged around in this cupboard, and I picked out a nice colourful copper-looking brass instrument, which I learnt its name to be a tenor horn at the time. And I thought, yeah, that was all right. And then took it home, cleaned it up, and then we all started having lessons, and it was a racket for about a year. And as you can imagine. And it was a bit of an ego trip for the history teacher, I think, because he always fancied himself doing little brass arrangements of stuff. So he had a bit of a whale of a time. Yeah, basically it came from that.
So if that history teacher hadn't found the key to that cupboard, your life could have taken a totally different turn.
Quite possibly, yeah. I always loved listening to music, but I never really thought I'd play for a living.
When did you realise that you were going to be a musician? Was there that sort of epiphany moment where you thought, oh, yeah, this is me, this is my home?
It didn't really happen until after music college and after 3.5 years in banking, where I thought,
Banking? You were a banker?
You could say that, yeah. I worked for Barclays Bank and then moved into finance houses like Lombard North Central and Scottish, as it was called then. And always playing bass guitar, because when I came out of music college, I sold my French horn, which was quite an expensive instrument, much to my father's annoyance, and bought a bass guitar. Was playing bass in bands, but I began to think, oh, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I'd rather sign on and become a musician like everybody else was doing in the early 80s. So it was a bit naughty, really. But very quickly I amassed a load of equipment and formed a PA company and hired out my services as a fledgling sound engineer with a PA.
So how did you get to go to music college? Was that as a result of having loads of lessons and doing exams? How did it come about?
Well, it certainly wasn't as a player. I moved to French horn far too late to become good enough to play.
How old were you when you started?
Playing tenor horn, we started at 11. And by the age of 15, I was having French horn lessons at Besses or the Barn. One of their guest conductors was a guy called Ifer James, who's quite a famous French horn player. So I was having lessons off Ifer. But between him and Michael Purton, who was the principal of the Halle at the time, it was getting obvious I was never going to quite catch up. Because, playing the French horn, which is certainly the hardest brass instrument, but one of the hardest instruments going, it was obvious I was never going to get to the standard that I wanted to be able to play in high-end orchestras. So hence why I thought, well, I'll become a rock star instead. So, basically, music college came about because I'd done O-level and A-level and S-level music. And then I went for an audition down at the Royal College. Not as a playing musician, but as a composer, because I wanted to do the composing and arranging course for a bachelor's degree down there. And somehow I managed to get in. I didn't get in at the Academy of Music. I don't know what went wrong there. But the Royal College accepted me, and I studied composition and arranging.
What style of composition do you like to do?
These days, it's everything, really. I mean, musical theatre tends to be the area I gravitate to, but when I'm playing in my rock bands, as it were, then I'll write pop rock songs.
When you were at college, was there more of a classical focus?
Oh, it was all classical, yeah. The reason I had to have, as a secondary study, the instrument being the French horn was because in those days they didn't recognise brass bands.
I didn't know that. When did that change?
It changed very quickly in the mid to late 80s. Then all of a sudden they realised there was money to be earned by having brass band players come in, and that all changed a little bit like all the other universities, really, where money was becoming more of an incentive.
Would you say that music is a vocation for you, or is it a job?
Oh, it's a vocation and just a delight, really. I have to earn money to pay the mortgage, obviously, but that tends to be corporate work. Being a sound engineer, which is really what I do for a living, i.e. that's what really pays the bills, that keeps me able to dip into music. Having said that, writing for the ice shows has obviously been a money earner, dare I say it. I hope to continue doing that. It's funny because it's come about complete circle, because coming out of music college, then ultimately playing in rock bands and wanting to be a rock star, in recent years it's turned circle. Now I'm going back to sort of the skills that I acquired, or that piqued my interest, if you like, at music college, arranging for orchestra.
Writing music for ice dance spectaculars is quite a niche market to get into. I mean, how do you decide to do it? What does a composer need to know before they start writing?
Our particular form of ice dance is in theatre, so it's not in these horrible ice rinks, which some shows still are performed in. We're in nice warm theatres watching basically very, very fast modern ballet dance moves. So again, it came through sound engineering. Back in the early 90s, I was a house engineer at a recording studio in Warrington called Frog Studios. And a guy I'd met a few years prior to that, a guy called Tony Mercer, he came in wanting some edits done on a nice show that they'd been working on. And basically, we became good mates. And when he wanted original music writing, he started to come to me. And the whole of this industry is usually something you fall into, I suppose. Or it's who you know or who you've met.
Yeah.
And this was a classic case of that.
So these ice dance shows, they happen in regular theatres. So I'm just trying to think of the kind of logistics of this. So an ice rink is put on top of the stage.
Basically, yes. The stage is measured out. Every theatre is different. Most of the choreography is adjusted and customised to the theatre.
Because presumably if you've got a really raked stage, that's going to affect the choreography.
In the early days of recce in every venue, be it in this country or internationally, then it has to be as flat as you possibly can be,
Yeah,
within
sure.
a few degrees. So assuming that's in order, then basically a membrane goes down to protect the stage just in case of any leaks. And then on top of that, we have these custom-made rubber mats, which is a continuous rubber mat that's rolled out of huge spools of rubber matting, if you like. And in this rubber matting is lots of capillaries, tubes, if you like, which all run through it. This is laid down, and those capillaries are connected at one end to a compressor that creates very cold temperatures for the glycol to flow through. And the glycol is like antifreeze. Once all that's confirmed, then we build up the sides, again with matting, to create a water pool. It's only an inch to an inch and a half thick, this ice rink. And that water freezes as a consequence of the temperatures created by the glycol running through.
So is the stage area, the dance area, fixed then for each show that you do?
Yeah, obviously, once we've created the ice rink, the scenery is fitted around that and the theatrical drops behind it.
So I guess that the casing of the joint before you agree to play at a given venue is dependent on quite a lot of factors.
Yeah, but most of the big theatres, we're lucky that we do the big ones like the Lowry or the Mayflower down in Southampton or Sadler's Wells, London. They obviously are very flat. It's not good to run around on raked theatres if you're a dancer, whether it's ice dance or ballet. So, yeah, I think the type of venue that our production attracts fits into it quite easily.
How much collaboration is there with the choreographers as you're developing the music for these shows?
Well, invariably, I write the music first. Obviously, the storyboard comes first, and I'm usually involved in the storyboard. Again, this would be with Tony. Tony Mercer's the key person to all of the artistic endeavours to do with the show, be it lighting, set design, etc. And then I go away and come up with musical ideas. These then obviously get conveyed to Tony. And once I get the go-ahead, I then spend the money either recording full orchestras or part orchestras in different venues and bring it all together. So, it starts with the music, actually. And because of our understanding, Tony and I, invariably I get it right because we know.
Because you can anticipate what he's after because you've worked with him for ages.
Yeah, there is that. Occasionally there's something that's not working, but I tend to overcook, make sure I've got stuff in the bank, if you like. can bring it
Yes.
out quickly. And that's the way we work. We have to cover ourselves a little bit. And that's how it comes together. And then from there onwards, once I've spent the big money recording the musicians, it might get edited to suit the show. Using technology, we can change things quite dramatically, even after the event these days.
So does the music ever change during the rehearsal process? I mean, obviously before you've recorded with musicians and it's just kind of samples, presumably.
Yeah, I'll use a sample library to get ideas down, and then a combination of real musicians and occasionally keeping some of the sample stuff because percussion is particularly good. Left as it is. Yes, it will change. It will change. And on several occasions, I've revisited music and had to re-record bits because it needed to be changed quite dramatically. But again, technology does give me the opportunity to change quite a lot. Recording in sections, when I say sections in orchestral sense, it might be a string section is recorded, and then the wind separate, brass, does give me a lot of flexibility to be able to remix, recreate, if you like, because obviously the bleed of the brass all over the rest of the orchestra is not a problem because they were recorded separately.
So what live musicians do you tend to use? Is it strings? Is it brass?
Given the budget, particularly when I did Cinderella, which was my own music, I rearranged music for the 3 classic Tchaikovsky scores in the past. But on Cinderella, I basically blew all the money I'd got on recording strings in Moscow. So I used the Moscow State Symphony there to record the strings. I had a huge string orchestra. And then I used my collection of brass and wind players in this country to bolster that up to a full orchestra. And then the percussion over the years has just been added to because a lot of the music changes just tend to be rhythmical. So bringing in more percussion has been the main area, if you like, of customizing the music over the years to suit re-choreographing the shows.
What's different about writing for ice shows compared to writing for other types of show? I mean, you've mentioned percussion. So is rhythm particularly important in this kind of music?
Yeah, the way ice performers work, I think it's similar to ballet dance. I mean, ballet dancers probably have more of an understanding of classical music than ice dancers. You've got to remember most ice dancers have come out of sport. So it's a dual-edged job for those guys. They're sport professionals and moving into an art form.
They've got to have so much skill.
Yeah. So they don't really necessarily listen to the music and work out their cues from hearing the music as a whole. They'll pick out something in the score at that point and they'll create their own count in their own mind and then would start a maneuver or a piece within the actual scene. So it might be a drum or it might be an oboe solo that they hear, and then they'll start their count, and then their little routine within the routine would commence. So it's quite an unusual situation. Also, you've got to remember, we can't easily use live music in ice dance because it's fast and furious, and ballet dancers tend to get visual cues from the conductor. We can't do that when you're moving at 20, 30 miles an hour on an ice rink, because by the time you've clocked something,
it's too late.
Yes, exactly. So they do work differently. So yeah, the music is probably even more important, or what's in the music, elements within the music is more important. And that slightly compromises me in a way because I've got to create musical cues within it.
Yeah, is it like kind of musical landmarks?
Yes, in the same way as you would do in cinematic or television.
Yes.
There are punches and flutters within the music that will create a piece of drama or anticipate a piece of drama. And it's much the same in what I do for the ice dance shows.
What are the biggest logistical challenges to writing for ice shows? Are there any?
You have to think of how the ice dancer might want to latch onto cues within the music or sounds. I did rearrange Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty and Nutcracker. I didn't really take that into account, but those wonderful scores by Tchaikovsky, wonderful music anyway, is just so full of glorious melodies and things happening within it. I think that having spoken to the ice performers, they tend to find that also as cues. So I don't think it's that different.
I asked Alistair Tuff from our proud sponsors, Alexander Knight & Co., the accountants for entrepreneurs, just how much he loves music. At the end of a long day, what music do you love to listen to?
I like listening to really upbeat stuff. So you might have had like a really hard day and you just want to get home and listen to something positive, something that makes me feel good, probably quite fast actually, that's what I'm quite into.
Do you dance, Alistair?
I do love a bit of a boogie sometimes, yeah, especially on a night out, a couple of drinks down, I'm always the first on the dance floor. Not very good at it, but I'm having a good time, so it doesn't really matter. Big singer as well, actually. I love to sing in the shower a lot as well.
What do you sing?
I sing all sorts, actually. In fact, I must have been about 12 or 13. I was a member of Scouts at the time and took part in their little Scouts Got Talent competition. Just sung my heart out.
What did you sing?
Don't Stop Believing by Glee. There's so much emotion in it, isn't there? So positive, so I think that's why I like it.
Big thanks to Alexander Knight & Co, the accountants for entrepreneurs. For the best tax advice, email hello@alexanderknightaccountants.co.uk and find out how much you and your business can save. Because a lot of the shows you work on are touring shows and they tour globally, does that influence how you approach the music in any way? Because you're catering for different audiences.
When I wrote the score for Barnum, which was more world music, that is probably less tourable from a point of view of the music being familiar than Cinderella or Swan Lake and whatever, where the symphony orchestra, if you like, is an internationally accepted language, sound. So yeah, we could go to China or Japan with an orchestral sounding score and equally go to Brazil and it's familiar. Whereas if you use an eclectic bunch of musical instruments in a world sense, that might be a little bit odd. But having said that, I hate to say this, but people don't really go to our productions to listen to the music.
It's to watch the ice dance.
Yeah. So hopefully what I'm doing is adding to the experience of what they're seeing. When you go to a cinema, the music's very, very important. You take it away, you notice, but you don't really notice it. A good score is something that you're not really aware of until after the event. And I think that's the same with us.
What's the best city you've ever worked in?
We regularly go to Bangkok to do the World Music and Dance Festival. I was there for 2 weeks. We had loads of logistical problems due to freighting and everything like that, which brings about a different dynamic. Obviously, when we're touring, we have very specialised equipment, not least because of the ice rink. So if a piece of that's missing or is not available, it's not something you can walk down the road and buy or pick up or repaint, if you like. If there's a piece of scenery missing, you can make up for that. But if a certain coupling, if you like, into the condensers is missing, then we're a bit stuck. So I enjoyed Bangkok for lots and lots of reasons. Not least because it was just a great audience, very appreciative audience. People there know me for my music, which is nice. And it's like the Edinburgh Festival, but for East Asia.
Where's been the most challenging place?
London.
London?
Yeah, the Royal Albert Hall, because that brought about extra issues. I don't normally tour with the production. Once we've set it up, then it's handed to a tour crew, if you like. So the lighting guy who does the lighting design or lighting woman will hand over the lighting plots, and then somebody would tour with that. And it's much the same with the sound. Once I'm happy and Tony's happy with the edits and the sound, it's handed over. But when we're in London, I'll invariably stay because that is one of the few places we use live musicians. So at the Albert Hall, I'll be conducting the orchestra. So it's incredibly challenging because A, we're building an ice rink in that iconic venue. B, we're using live musicians, which is even more unheard of in the ice dance fraternity. And C, it's slightly in the round insofar as the ice rink, if you like, spreads out into the area that's normally a seated area. Yeah. So it's where the promenaders are normally stood at the proms. So we're semi in the round, and the orchestra and myself will be behind, or when we did Swan Lake, actually above. We'll be above the scenery, and the scenery is created in places like that by great big screens, because obviously it's not really a theatre, so you can't drop in all your tabs and all the scenery changes. So we create that in the form of video footage. So very challenging on lots of fronts.
That sounds like it was a massive production.
It was. We've done it now 3 times at the Albert Hall. The first time was Cinderella. Second time was Swan Lake. And most recently was Nutcracker. From a personal point of view, the Nutcracker was probably the most challenging because I wasn't able to use my own orchestra. I had to use the Raymond Gubby orchestra, which were fantastic musicians, but it was completely new faces, and I get scolded by my wife for this. But I'm not really a conductor, so I do rely on the musicians around me to help them, if you like. But I was really on my own there, and I came of age, if you like, as a conductor.
For me, the thought of conducting an orchestra in a big venue is a terrifying and wonderful thought. I wanted to know how Tim approaches conducting and what it feels like to stand on that podium. How do you begin to assert your authority over an orchestra? How do you do it?
Well, I suppose the first thing is not to say, "Oh, sorry, this is not my real job."
Yes.
If that does slip out, I've then got my work cut out. I don't mean to be rude to musicians. Hopefully I can say this because I am a musician in a way. Anyway, is basically, look, we can only do this one way, and I'm afraid this has to be my way. And it's especially my way because we're working with very fast dance.
Yes.
As a conductor, I'm on a click. So the click is ruling me even.
Yes.
I can't pull things around to any great degree because we have to be where we need to be at any one point in time. Otherwise, there'll be a crash or could be a serious accident. So once I've instilled that, and they do understand the complexity of our show, they wouldn't be involved in the first place otherwise, then because they know it's not Tchaikovsky's score, it's my rearrangement, and they quite obviously notice that straight away. Particularly with Nutcracker, I completely redesigned the score. Some of the musicians, funnily enough, came in with the slight thought that they were going to be playing what they played last Christmas. And then all of a sudden they're looking at the music going, this is not Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker, but of course it is. But it's AKA Tim Duncan and the Imperial High Stars version of it. So that gets their attention. So that they're actually having to remember to sight read rather than just play by memory.
Yeah.
So I get that, and I get the respect because basically they know I've recorded this score and I've arranged the score.
And you've written it. You've arranged it.
Exactly. And frankly, we're at the Albert Hall, Sunshine, so get your act together. So I don't have too many difficulties. And invariably by the end of the second or the third performance, then the musicians are queuing up to sit next to me in the canteen because obviously they then realise this is a serious undertaking.
That moment just before the show started at the Royal Albert Hall, what was going through your mind? You're about to step up. I'd be bricking it, Tim.
Well, I was bricking it. That's very polite language, Emma. The very first time I ever did it for Cinderella, which was my score, I was absolutely terrified. Terrified because it was like, what am I doing here? You know, I'm a technician more than a conductor for most of the shows, after recording the scores, of course. So I was there as a performer. So, yeah, but very quickly, you just have to switch that off, put it to the back of your mind and take on the job in hand. And I looked up and I'm surrounded by some very, very talented musicians. I mean, Cinderella was my orchestra, which is basically the Manchester Symphony. And I had my battery of wind players right in front of me and they just exude confidence, even though
Yes.
they were bricking it as well, because we were all on headphones. We all had access to the click, but they were also taking visual acuity from myself. So I was conducting. We just started. The show started, and moments later, end of Act 1, you're thinking, wow, where did that go? Then you're backstage, and then it's a big come down almost.
The adrenaline must have been coursing through your veins, surely.
It was, yeah, because, again, not being really a conductor, doing it for the first time, and doing it for the first time at the Royal Albert Hall, it was staggering.
Was that your first time conducting at the Royal Albert Hall?
A proper gig, yes. Yeah, obviously.
Holy moly, Tim.
Did some conducting at the college, and I've done a bit
Bloody Nora.
And obviously MDing, if you like. I've recently just been MDing a show that has just started, actually, and it's about to start touring. We were at the Manchester Cathedral last week. But I'm MDing singers there, so it's a different kettle of fish. Yes, to stand in front of an orchestra with a live audience, that was the first time ever I'd done that.
How did you approach arranging Tchaikovsky's music? Where did you start? Did you think, oh my God, this is Tchaikovsky? Was it daunting or did you just sort of get in there?
Well, it's incredibly daunting because my music is similar, if you like. Tchaikovsky, I love romantic orchestral music, and he's one of the, if not the greatest romantic writers of music in that period. And his orchestration is right up my street, lots of horns, lots of brass and wonderful melodies carried out of the woodwind section.
And drama.
And drama, of course. I don't think there's ever been 3 better musical scores for ballet written since his 3 scores. I'm sure Stravinsky will probably have a pop at me if he could hear me now. But when you're faced with reworking a supreme master of his art or her art, and in this case Tchaikovsky, then really you have to get inside of the music, inside of what was written, what the arrangements tell you, because obviously you can write a piece of music, and you'll know this, Emma, a different instrument plays it, and it can have a completely different emotional...
Changes it totally.
Yeah. And a different player even.
Yeah. Different articulations just can change a complete vibe of a piece.
Yeah, so basically my knowledge of what Tony was going to want from the storyline, because the storyline is pretty well the same, be it ballet or ice dance, we change the order of events to suit what we're doing.
Is that why you had to rearrange it?
Yes.
Because the story had been shifted around a bit?
A combination of that and also, like I said earlier on, bringing out elements in the music that make it a little bit easier for the performers to sort of like do themselves. There is that. There was a bit of ego on my point of view saying, sorry, Mr. Tchaikovsky, I'm going to take that clarinet solo out and replace it with a French horn because that's my favourite instrument. So there was a degree of that, but it also in drama, one of the ways you can articulate and enhance the drama is the use of an instrument, and the horn is a very noble instrument. So you wouldn't necessarily use a horn to play a motif for anything other than a noble part, in the same way as a very plaintive swan, if you like. You can't replace the oboe solo in that. That has to be the oboe. So musical instrumentation tells the story a great deal. So my rearranging, if you like, was a lot around that. And there's extra rhythm parts going in, suppose, again, to suit.
To help the dancers.
Yeah, to create metronomic events. And one of the pieces we completely rewrote to become a very Celtic sound, because Tony wanted a Celtic piece, and we seem to have a Celtic piece in every show. The actual complete feel of the piece became a Celtic 6/8 or 12/8 in this case feel, and it wasn't like that in Tchaikovsky's original. I'm sure he's turning in his grave.
But it's bringing his music to a new audience.
Absolutely, yeah. And it certainly did in the piece I'm referring to in Swan Lake, and the piece I did in The Nutcracker, which was changed very dramatically like that. So yeah, it does.
When you're collaborating with an artist as a sound engineer, what's your favourite part of that?
Well, if the artist is of a standing, if you like, so somebody like Ruby Turner, then walking into the vocal booth and adjusting the microphone in the presence of such a fantastic artist is quite incredible, really. Albeit putting a microphone on an esteemed classical violinist, that to me is the biggest buzz.
What's it like in that moment when they just start to make their sound? How does it feel?
It can be quite magical, because obviously you're hearing a performance for the first time. You stood there, they're in a different room invariably. You're glaring at the speakers, glaring at meters. But for the most part, a performance starts to manifest. It's phenomenal, and hairs do go up on the back of on your back. But it can also be a disaster as well, of course. It's not always going to be right. All of a sudden, I won't mention the guy's name, but we did some recording with an ex-Coronation Street star, and I had no idea what to expect. And the producer was there with me, and I don't think he'd really heard him sing or not sing. And he came in and we set up the microphone. He opened his mouth to sing, and it was just, oh dear, dear. We're going to have our work cut out here, you know. So it can be opposite. It can be equally the opposite. But for the most part, I'd like to think I surround myself, or I'm very honoured to be surrounded by some great musicians who, frankly, it's just a pure pleasure and delight. I mean, the guy I'd write music with for these shows, we collaborate on some stuff. He writes some bits, I write bits. He's a phenomenal pianist, and just to sit there listening to him playing piano, I'm just gobsmacked. I've never got to that level of musicianship on a musical instrument. Even I find it amazing when you see and listen and watch. And if you're in close proximity in a recording studio, it's just amplified, I think.
It is an awesome experience, isn't it, when you're in the presence of such mind-blowing talent?
Well, like yourself.
Oh, hush now, you're smoothing.
Sent you a brief to do this voiceover for one of the shows, and what comes back is 5 different versions. You could have been 5 different people. And it's not just music, like I say, people like yourself, dancers, choreographers, seamstresses. I mean, that's another area of our shows which is staggering. The costumes that they have to make, because they have to make them for a very quick change of costumes. They have to be strong but very light, made of materials that can be seen under lighting, very colourful, vibrant. That's an art in its own self. A very understated art, I think.
Yeah. Because they have to move with the dancer's body as well, don't they? And you know, if you can't have sequins falling off when you're doing an ice dance show. It's all got to be technically correct. You can't have wardrobe malfunctions when you're doing a triple salco.
Any of those manoeuvres, could take its toll on a costume, either leaving the dancer at the end of it exposed or potentially tangled up in something which could be dangerous. So it does happen from time to time, and the professionalism of the dancer means you probably don't notice it. But if something fell off and somebody was immediately to skate over that would cause a fall. The blade would just suddenly stop moving on water, and you come to a an immediate halt. And of course, it's not just ice dance. We employ a lot of circus manoeuvres. We use fire on the ice.
Wow.
So again, the costumes have to be designed with that in mind. It's made of non-flammable material. They're obviously extra sprayed just before they might come into contact with fire to make sure that they wouldn't go up. But all these sort of things have to be thought about by other people. So I'm in awe of that.
A lot can go wrong potentially, can't it, with an ice show?
I think 1 in 5 performances, there might be a break in the ice and part of the rubber tubing would get punctured. And as a consequence, the show either needs to be stopped at that moment in time or a judgment made as to when we're going to stop or whether we're close enough to an interval to be able to repair that. Because if too much glycol leaks out, then it just melts the ice rink.
So is there somebody observing the state of the ice the whole time?
Well, invariably, we'll get feedback off the skaters themselves.
Yeah.
That they'll say there's a bad patch there. They'll convey that not just to the techies, but also to the other dancers who might say that's an area to avoid until we've had a chance to have a look at it. Somebody doing a triple salchow, as you pointed out there, that if they hit the ice a little bit heavier or with the wrong part of their blade, it will start to damage the ice, which can be repaired very quickly. But in the process of a show, you don't want somebody running on with a bucket of water and a repair kit. You want to be able to do that when
it could ruin Swan Lake, couldn't it?
Certainly would, yeah.
Guy with a bucket.
Yeah. So invariably these parts, these dead bits of the ice rink will be avoided instantly because one of the dancers will have picked up on that. And obviously the techies are ready to pounce on that if it gets worse.
Working on a huge production that tours the world is a hell of an experience, I imagine. The travel, the adrenaline, the technical issues, the logistics, the rehearsals, the performances. It's massive. I wanted to ask Tim about what happens when the show's over.
When I'm actively involved, like I'm conducting, I just go and sit in the changing room and have a glass of something, usually water actually, because I'm quite exhausted. Waving your arms about for 2 1-hour slots is physically quite exhausting. And of course, the mental situation of all of a sudden, you turn off. I just sit in the corner. I don't think I do anything for about 10, 15 minutes. I don't really like publicity, so I'm not one to run out there and get plaudits or get this. And then there's a steady knock on the door, or has been in the past, and some of the skaters will come in and see me and say how much they enjoyed it again. And
Wow.
And then I'll do my tour of the techies because I'm very much one to work with the technicians. I'll go and work with them. Even when we're at the Albert Hall, I'll get there when the build is happening and I'll push flight cases around and give them a hand and stuff like that. So I like doing that. And after the show, I like doing the same. The one time I really hate is when it's the very final performance. And then we've got the get out because that's awful. And I don't tend to be involved in that anyway because we'll bring in a new fleet of people, if you like, professional get outers. And it's a young person's job to smash the ice rink up, I can tell you, because I invariably, well, in Bangkok, I was given the hammers, if you like, these great big things I had an hour of bashing ice and that kills you. So
Sounds quite therapeutic though, Tim.
It can be, yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And then
I'd be up for a bit of that, to be honest.
Bash that ice up. Let's move on.
All the show notes for this episode are available in the description, and there's a bunch more stuff at beforethebaropens.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just take your pick. Before the Bar Opens is created by me, Emma Clarke, and is produced by Rick Watson. I compose the theme music we use on Before the Bar Opens, and you can hear the full piece on our website, beforethebaropens.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, hopefully a lovely one, and tell your friends. Another episode will be along very soon, so don't miss it. Thanks for listening.